The massive spaceship Avalon is hurtling through space towards a colonized planet called Homestead 2, but the peaceful journey takes a terrifying turn when the ship encounters a massive asteroid belt that threatens its safety. Jimmy awakens to find himself completely alone on the luxurious vessel. He receives instructions about his elegant room and the available activities. He leaves his room and enters a classroom designed for a large number of students. The hologram instructor asks him to hold his questions until the end of the lesson, but Jimmy persists in asking why he is alone. He realizes that the hologram cannot answer and goes in search of others. But after discovering that the robot is also clueless, Jimmy demands to see the captain. He notices that the main crew is asleep. He reaches the control room and discovers that this journey will take 90 years to reach Homestead 2, which means he woke up at a very inopportune time. He sends a message to Earth, asking what to do, since he doesn't know how to go back into stasis. The communication system informs him that it will take 55 years to get a response from Earth. Jimmy breaks down and finds the spaceship's bar. He orders a drink from the bartender and realizes he is a robot named Arthur. Jimmy wants to ask him for more information, but the robot is unable to explain why he woke up early. After waking up the next day, he tries to repair the stasis unit using some tools, but he fails. The ship's systems malfunction frequently, and Jimmy tries restaurants, games, and recreational activities, but he becomes increasingly miserable because he is alone. He wanders drunkenly around the stasis units to find himself in a room with spacesuits designed for spacewalks. He puts on a spacesuit and presses the lever, then the button to open the door. He is amazed by the scene outside the ship. He is the only human experiencing this unique moment. He floats in space, and feelings of sadness overwhelm him. He pulls the lever, ready to end his life, but backs down at the last moment and runs inside, tripping over his bottle. Jimmy gets up and is attracted to a woman in one of the stasis units named Aurora. He immediately searches for her files and listens to her interviews and becomes fascinated by her. At the bar, he talks to Arthur about her. He has met his ideal woman, but she is out of reach. The thought of waking her up consumes him, and the idea of waking her up begins to haunt him. He talks about it with Arthur, but the robot doesn't understand the dilemma of the situation. Waking Aurora up could condemn her to a certain fate of death on board the ship. Jimmy resists the idea at first, but gives into it. He goes to her unit and manages to disable it. While Aurora wakes up, Jimmy disappears and returns to his room. Later, he finds her looking as bewildered as he was a year ago. He tells her that they are the only two awake, and takes her to the control room. He reveals that he is unable to reach the crew or the main control system. This terrifies her, and prompts her to throw herself back into the stasis unit. He then explains to her that there is no special equipment on board the ship to put them back into stasis, which practically means their death on the ship. He suggests that she rest after her difficult awakening. She feels sorry for him, after he had to spend more than a year alone on the ship. Jimmy returns to the bar full of regret for what he did, and asks Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one who unfroze her. The next day, Aurora wakes up and heads to breakfast. The ship's systems suffer a sudden malfunction. In the restaurant, Aurora notices that Jimmy has been eating the same breakfast for a year, so she brings him a dish from the gold class menu. They discuss the possibility of fixing the stasis chambers, and Aurora refuses to give up. Later, she tries to break down the cockpit doors, and Jimmy witnesses increasing malfunctions throughout the ship, and Aurora laments her life aboard the Avalon. She writes, runs, and swims in the pool, and becomes more aware of her condition. She heads to the restaurant to interview Jimmy, believing that his story might be interesting. She asks him why he left Earth and settled on a deserted planet. He explains that he hopes to be a happy person in the new world and build a decent life. Later, Aurora reveals the reason for her being on the journey. Her plan was to move to the planet Homestead 2, live there for a year, then return to Earth to be the first journalist to write the greatest story ever. Slowly, Aurora gives up on trying to fix the ship, and Jimmy comes up with ways to make her happy. He takes her dancing, to the movies, to the basketball court, and finally to the bar to meet Arthur. Jimmy remains alone with the robot, feeling bad about what he did to her. We see him working on something, and Aurora enters the space observatory to find a miniature model of the Chrysler building that he made for her as a gift. They go on a date to the bar, have dinner, and share stories about their lives. She tells him that she lost her father when she was a teenager. After dinner, he takes her to the spacesuits. They go on a spacewalk, and Jimmy is finally able to share this wonderful experience with someone. They turn off the magnets on their boots and float in space together. Once they return, they share a passionate kiss and go to live together in the same room. They run, eat, and sleep together. Jimmy explores the ship further and finds a garden and brings Aurora flowers. One day, the ship passes by a red giant star, and they go to the observation deck to watch it. On Aurora's birthday, they celebrate later in one of the many restaurants on the ship, and then in the bar. Jimmy goes to the bathroom and prepares the wedding ring he made for her, while she stays in the bar talking to Arthur. But the robot mistakenly reveals to her that Jimmy deliberately took her out of the the cryo chamber. Suddenly Jimmy returns, and she looks at him in complete shock. She runs away angry and terrified, and he returns to his room. In the morning, he meets her in the restaurant, but as soon as he speaks to her, she runs away. Despair takes over Aurora, and on a rough night, she goes to his room and punches and kicks him, but she backs off before killing him. Later, Jimmy tries to apologize and justify his actions over the loudspeaker, telling her that he loved her, but Aurora doesn't care. Afterward, other malfunctions occur, and the ship faces a fatal system error. Jimmy enters the elevator, and it breaks down. Aurora goes to the restaurant, where the food machine also breaks down. Suddenly, they both hear the voice of the ship's captain over the loudspeaker asking who planted the tree. Jimmy and Aurora rush to the hall to find the captain standing in front of Jimmy's tree. They tell him about the ship's situation, but he doesn't understand how the stasis units could malfunction. Alex takes them with him, and discovers a malfunction in the ship's computer that requires manual checks. As they leave, a robot nearly falls on their heads, and they tell him about the repeated malfunctions. He replies that this shouldn't happen, and asks them to inspect the ship. Alex checks the stasis units where he discovers the reason for the malfunction of Aurora's chamber. It was manually damaged. He reviews the data, and Aurora joins him, telling him about what Jimmy did in her stasis pod. He explains to her that Jimmy was a drowning man who needed a savior. Jimmy enters, carrying the 16th malfunctioning robot. Alex feels sick and goes to rest, but emerges with a bloody cough. That night, Aurora can't sleep, so she goes for a swim. Suddenly, the ship loses gravity, and Aurora begins to drown as the water moves with her due to the lack of gravity. Gravity barely returns, and Aurora miraculously survives. She meets Jimmy on her way to Alex. Alex concludes that a major system malfunction has occurred. They need to find and fix the source of the failure, as the entire ship is trying to compensate for the deficiency. If they don't fix it, the nuclear reactor will explode and destroy the entire ship. They go to search for the problem, but Alex loses consciousness, and they carry him to the medical room. He is dying, and there is no cure to stop it or prolong his life. After a while, they meet in the control room, and Alex hands them the master key, asking them to fix the ship. Then he dies immediately. Suddenly, the lights turn red, and the ship begins to shake. They rush towards the engineering section, but another malfunction hits the gravity drive. Arthur also suffers a sudden malfunction at the same moment, forcing Jimmy to disable him. They finally reach the engineering section, and search for the problem. They discover the malfunction in the power station, and when they open the door, Aurora is subjected to tremendous pressure that pulls her inside. The asteroid had caused a breach in the ship's walls. Jimmy is also pulled in, but he holds onto the door, as it slowly closes on him. He drifts inside, and quickly manages to seal the hole with a strange substance. Jimmy realizes there is another internal hole. They trace the path of the meteor, and find a crack in the reactor's computer. Jimmy realizes that he might find a replacement part to install. They finally find the replacement part, but the reactor venting process fails. They do it manually, but it fails again. Jimmy discovers that he needs to open the vent from outside the ship so they can vent the reactor. As he prepares to go out, he gives Aurora the master key because he may not return. She asks him to come back because she can't live without him. Aurora returns to the reactor, where the temperature reaches critical levels. A bolt of lightning erupts from the reactor and hits her arm. As Jimmy approaches the vent, he sees the door and tries to open it. He quickly realizes that he will have to stay with the jammed door until the reactor is vented and tells Aurora so. She opposes the plan, but he goes ahead and asks her to vent the reactor. She doesn't want him to die, but he stresses the need to save the others, so she reluctantly vents the reactor. The operation is successful, but the reactor fumes push Jimmy away and break his rope. The pressure in his suit also decreases, and he tells Aurora what happened. She moves as fast as she can to put on a suit and rescue him, and she flies to save him, but she is pulled back. Suddenly, she grabs his rope at the last moment. She pulls him to the medical room to discover that he has indeed died. She remembers the master key with difficulty to bypass medical protocols and bring him back to life. The medical room automatically activates and brings Jimmy back to life. Later, Aurora stitches up Arthur, and the captain receives an honorable space burial. Days later, Jimmy takes her to the medical room and tells her that he was able to activate the stasis system in it. Now she can freeze herself for 90 years, until the ship reaches the planet. But Aurora decides not to leave him alone and stays awake with him on the ship. Jimmy finally presents her with the wedding ring, and they live their lives together. 90 years pass and the ship reaches the deserted planet, and everyone wakes up. They find the ship in a completely unexpected state, with a message from Aurora. She tells them the story of saving the ship while they were frozen.